Today, Walmart is no longer just a retail chain. It is a global economic force that defies conventional measurement. It is an empire of over 15,000 retail fortresses stretching across 27 countries. With 2.3 million employees, a workforce larger than the standing armies of most superpowers, Walmart's revenue is a financial tidal wave capable of eclipsing the GDP of entire nations. This empire has distilled into an unimaginable family fortune exceeding $200 billion. Yet, this brilliant prosperity casts a long, dark shadow. The rise of Walmart left a trail of devastation across 4,000 small towns throughout America. The rule was simple but brutal. Wherever the big blue box appeared, the heartbeat of the old community began to fade. Mom and pop grocery stores, local pharmacies, and the corner diners that were once the soul of the street, all vanished like ghosts. What remained were vast, empty concrete parking lots, and the haunting silence of local businesses crushed under the heel of hyper-optimization. At the center of this economic earthquake stood Sam Walton, a man woven from the deepest paradoxes of the American dream. For decades, the world watched in fascination as a billionaire who dominated the Forbes list of the world's richest people remained fiercely loyal to a rusted, beat-up Ford pickup truck until the day he died. He was honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to the American spirit. Yet, he built a system fueled by wages so low, they hovered at the edge of the poverty line. Sam Walton never hid the secret to his success. He openly, almost cheerfully, and admitted that he stole most of his business ideas from competitors. He didn't invent anything new. He simply took the best of what others were doing, sharpened it, and executed it with ruthless precision. But behind the folksy, down-home persona of this man from Arkansas was a razor-sharp strategic mind and a boundless ambition. To understand how an idea thief built an empire that fundamentally rewired global commerce, we have to turn back the clock. We must leave behind the billion-dollar figures and the sprawling supercenters to return to a different era, a time when Sam Walton was just a young man with a notepad in his pocket, watching the first footsteps of customers on the polished wood floors of a JCPenney. The journey began with those small, relentless observations. In the year 1940, as dark clouds of World War II began to loom over global powers, America sat in a state of limbo, caught between recovery from the Great Depression and the uneasy anticipation of global conflict. But in Des Moines, Iowa, inside a bustling JCPenney on a busy downtown street, 22-year-old Sam Walton was engaging in a different kind of warfare, the battle for the attention and trust of the American consumer. Sam did not emerge as a future tycoon. He was a young management trainee earning a modest $75 a month. For that sum, his duties were simple: stock the shelves, sweep the floors, and assist customers. But Sam Walton never did anything simply. While other clerks stared at the wall clock, praying for the end of their shift to escape the monotony of the aisles, Sam viewed every square foot of that JCPenney as a living laboratory. The first and most astonishing skill Sam cultivated was his power of recall. He didn't just remember a customer's face. He memorized their name, the names of their children, and even the minute details of items they had purchased weeks prior. When a woman walked in looking for a new dress, Sam could remind her that the blue coat she bought last time would pair perfectly with this specific fabric. This connection wasn't a cheap sales gimmick. It was a profound understanding of human psychology in a post-Depression era. People didn't just want to buy an object. They wanted to be recognized, respected, and felt important in a world that was becoming increasingly industrialized and anonymous. Sam Walton transformed the checkout counter into a personal conversation, and an experience customers couldn't find anywhere else. However, Sam's true genius lay in what he did when customers weren't looking at him. He became a true anthropologist of commerce. From behind the stacks of merchandise, Sam quietly observed the dance of the shopper. He realized that human behavior within a retail space was never random. He watched how light from the glass windows hit bolts of fabric, making them more alluring, and noted that customers almost instinctively turned right upon entering the store. He studied the hesitation in a man's eyes as he picked up a hammer, examined it, then set it back down because of a price difference of a few cents. He asked himself, why did they choose this aisle over that one? What makes an item irresistible, and what turns it into dead inventory? Every observation, every tiny detail, and from the height of the shelves to the placement of price tags, was meticulously recorded in a small notepad. That notebook became his constant companion, the secret weapon he always carried. He was dissecting the DNA of retail, learning how to optimize every inch of space and every second of a customer's time. James Cash Penney, the founder of the chain, had a philosophy called the Golden Rule. Treat the customer as you would want to be treated. Sam soaked up this ideology, but he also recognized its limitations. At J.C. Penney, he was still just a cog in a massive machine. He had to follow rigid supply rules and fixed price points dictated from headquarters. The hunger to implement his own ideas began to grow within him. He wanted to experiment with bolder displays, and he wanted to negotiate directly with suppliers to drive prices even lower, things a trainee at J.C. Penney was never permitted to do. He realized that to truly change how the world shops, he needed a space where he was the master of the rules. 18 months in Des Moines provided Sam with more than just retail skills. It forged his core business philosophy. Success does not come from grand ideas on paper, but from the relentless observation of the smallest details on the floor. When Sam Walton left J.C. Penney in early 1942 to prepare for military service, he took more than just his personal luggage. He carried a treasure trove of data on human behavior and a notepad full of untapped strategies. He was ready to move from observer to creator. His next stop would be Newport, where the theories of the Anthropologist of commerce would be put to a brutal and ambitious test. Newport, Arkansas, in 1945, was a quintessential small southern town. Home to roughly 7,000 souls, it nestled serenely on the banks of the White River in the northeastern corner of the state. This was deep cotton country, a bustling railroad hub where the rhythmic clang of freight cars was as familiar as the chirping of crickets. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the intricate social fabric was so tightly woven that the arrival of a newcomer, especially one daring enough to purchase a local business, was not merely noticed, but immediately and thoroughly evaluated by the town's watchful eyes. Into this tightly woven social fabric stepped Sam Walton, and armed with his notepad and a head full of observations from the polished floors of Des Moines. The Ben Franklin franchise that Sam Walton acquired was situated on Front Street, the bustling heart of downtown Newport. By any meaningful metric, the store was significantly underperforming. The previous owner, by all accounts, had allowed the operation to become slovenly. Sales were lackluster, inventory management was a chaotic mess, and the general atmosphere lacked any discernible vigor. The store, however, possessed undeniable potential. Ben Franklin franchises were a known entity, well-established, reliably supplied, and operated on a proven, successful format. But Newport's location was nowhere near realizing its full capacity. Walton, brimming with his characteristic energy and analytical drive, immediately set to work, and he began by extending the store's operating hours, recognizing that convenience was a powerful draw. He then ventured onto the sidewalk, a bold and unconventional move for a dime store, setting up impromptu displays and selling products outdoors, a technique he had observed working wonders in other markets and promptly imported. He bypassed the standard, often more expensive, franchise supply chain, directly negotiating with manufacturers and suppliers to find cheaper sources for identical products, keenly pocketing the margin difference. His hunger for knowledge led him all the way to the Ben Franklin headquarters in Chicago, where he delved deep into their operations, seeking out every scrap of information and insight that wasn't explicitly detailed in the official franchise manual. Crucially, and it was during this period that he also began a practice that would come to define his entire professional career. He started visiting other stores, not just other Ben Franklin franchises, but literally every single retail operation within driving distance of Newport, variety stores, dry goods emporiums, and even the nascent self-service grocery operations that were beginning to emerge. He would walk in, notepad in hand, sometimes conspicuously, sometimes with a more discreet air, and simply observe. How were the products strategically displayed? How were prices meticulously marked to catch the eye? What was the flow of the checkout process, And where did bottlenecks occur? What items captivated customers the longest? And, perhaps most tellingly, what were they picking up only to put back down and indicating a potential unmet need or dissatisfaction? He was, quite systematically, reverse engineering the entire retail experience from the customer's perspective, a pioneering approach long before customer experience became a hallowed concept in business schools. Within a mere 3 years, Walton's tireless efforts had transformed the Newport Ben Franklin into the most profitable Ben Franklin franchise in the entire 6-state region. Sales had soared from a dismal $80,000 annually when he acquired it to an impressive $250,000 by his 5th year. The store was generating a robust $40,000 a year in pure profit. But in the world of business, success can be a double-edged sword, attracting not just admiration, but envy. Newport, predictably, took notice. Other local merchants and keen observers of the town's commercial pulse certainly noticed the seismic shift. And perhaps most significantly, the landlord of the building, a formidable figure named P.K. Holmes, definitely noticed. Holmes harbored ambitions for his own son to enter the retail arena. So, when Walton's 5-year lease neared its expiration in 1950, Holmes, with shrewd calculation, flatly refused to renew it. The original lease, a detail Walton would later lament as the single biggest business mistake of his life, a misstep he vowed never to repeat, contained no renewal option. Holmes summarily took possession of the thriving store, handed it over to his son, and left a stunned Walton with nothing but his inventory, the invaluable goodwill he had painstakingly built, and absolutely no physical location. Walton, then 32 years old, was devastated, and he had dedicated 5 arduous years to building something genuinely successful, only to have it snatched away by a legal technicality. He had no choice but to leave Newport entirely. The Holmes family now controlled the prime retail location in town. He later confessed in his autobiography that this period marked the lowest point of his professional life, recalling days spent driving aimlessly, genuinely adrift and uncertain of what the future held. Yet, it was in this state of wandering that the seeds of a global empire began to germinate. What came next was Bentonville. Driven by Helen's desire to live in a small town near her family, Walton's search led him to a small variety store in Bentonville, Arkansas, an even smaller, more remote town with a population of just 3,000, and nestled deep in the scenic Ozark Mountains in the northwest corner of the state. This time, having learned his painful lesson, he meticulously signed a lease that explicitly included a renewal option. He also shrewdly negotiated a clause that would, in time, allow him to eventually own the building outright. At first glance, the move to Bentonville seemed like a significant step backward. Newport had been a town of 7,000. Bentonville was less than half that size. The location he secured was less central, less trafficked, and by any conventional commercial analysis, far less promising. But Walton had reflected deeply on his Newport experience, particularly on what had transpired when Holmes had seized his thriving store. And from that reflection, he had drawn a profound conclusion, and one that would become the strategic bedrock of everything he would ultimately build. In small towns, he realized, the individual or entity that controlled the real estate effectively controlled the entire market. In a town of 3,000 people, there was, he deduced, precisely enough room for one dominant general merchandise retailer. If you were that retailer, if you owned or exerted control over your physical space and vigorously competed on price, you essentially became a local monopoly, a formidable commercial force unto yourself. He realized that if he built a store large enough in a town small enough, no competitor would dare to enter the market because there simply wasn't enough room for two. The prevailing retail wisdom of the early 1950s dictated that a profitable store required significant population density. You needed a town with at least 10,000 residents, the experts claimed, to sustain a decent variety store. You needed bustling foot traffic, which invariably meant seeking out urban or suburban locations. Walton, however, possessed an independent mind, and he believed this conventional wisdom was fundamentally flawed. He posited that the truly underserved market wasn't the urban sprawl. It was the vast, often overlooked rural expanse, the small towns scattered across the American South and Midwest. These communities, predominantly farming communities and blue-collar towns, had people with money and steady employment, but they lacked convenient access to the kind of variety and competitive pricing that city shoppers took for granted. People in these towns were regularly driving 30 or 40 miles, often more, to shop in larger cities. Walton's revolutionary insight was simple yet audacious. If you opened a store directly in their town, offering consistently low prices and a genuinely decent selection, they would undeniably come. He dedicated the entire decade of the 1950s to rigorously testing this audacious theory across a string of Ben Franklin franchises in various small Arkansas towns, places like Fayetteville, Springdale, and Harrison. With each new store he opened, the same conclusion was powerfully reinforced. Small-town America represented an enormous, largely untapped retail market, and, to his astonishment, nobody was taking it seriously enough to serve it comprehensively. By 1960, Sam and his brother Bud were operating 9 successful Ben Franklin stores across Arkansas and Missouri. But for a man with Sam's vision, being the most successful franchisee in a rigid system felt more like a cage than a triumph. They were undeniably profitable, but Walton was growing increasingly frustrated with the inherent limitations of the franchise model. Ben Franklin headquarters, he felt, took an excessive cut of everything, dictating pricing strategies, supply chains, and even store formats with an iron fist. More critically, they were utterly uninterested in the revolutionary strategy Walton was painstakingly developing, the deep discount approach, the extreme low price positioning that he firmly believed was the absolute key to unlocking the vast potential of the rural market on a much grander scale. But squeezing suppliers was only the first step. The goods still had to move, and they had to move faster than anyone in history thought possible. This was the breaking point. Sam realized he was no longer just running stores. He was inventing a new way to trade, and his partners were standing in his way. Driven by his conviction, he made a pilgrimage to the Ben Franklin headquarters, proposing a radical idea. The company should create a new discount format specifically tailored for small towns. A Ben Franklin branded store, he argued, that competed on price with an even greater aggression, and specifically targeting markets deemed too small for the burgeoning big-box discount chains that were beginning to emerge in the early 1960s. The executives at Butler Brothers, Ben Franklin's parent company, scoffed at the idea. They couldn't understand why anyone would deliberately slash profit margins to the bone, dismissing Sam's vision as a reckless gamble. So, with characteristic resolve, Sam Walton decided to build it himself. Before we delve into the birth of the very first Walmart, it's imperative to spend some time on a topic that Sam Walton himself was unusually candid about, both in his autobiography and in numerous interviews. Precisely how much of his groundbreaking business model he directly copied from other people. It wasn't merely that he was inspired by or influenced by others. He openly admitted to outright copying. So transparent was he about this practice that it almost reads as a form of audacious bragging. He often described visiting competitor stores as one of his primary, most crucial business activities. He spoke matter-of-factly about specific innovations he had observed at particular competitors, only to implement them immediately within his own stores. He once declared, with what appeared to be genuine pride, that most of his best ideas were not, in fact, his own. They were other people's brilliant insights that he simply managed to execute with superior efficiency and scale. Let's examine the historical record of these strategic borrowings. The foundational self-service retail concept, the radical idea that customers could freely walk through a store, select their own products from open shelves, and then bring them to a central checkout counter, rather than needing a clerk to retrieve every item, originated with Clarence Saunders, who pioneered the first Piggly Wiggly store in Memphis back in 1916. By the time Walton was operating his Ben Franklin stores in the 1950s, self-service was already a standard practice in grocery stores, but it remained remarkably uncommon and novel in variety retail. Walton, ever the astute observer, adopted it immediately and completely, recognizing its power to enhance efficiency and customer autonomy. Then there was the discount retail model itself. the audacious strategy of operating on extremely thin profit margins, using sheer sales volume to compensate for those narrow margins, and making the promise of the lowest price the primary marketing message, was developed in the late 1950s and early 1960s by a cluster of innovative retailers. Most significant among these pioneers was Kmart, owned by the S.S. Kresge Company, as well as Two Guys, Caldor, and the New England-based Ann and Hope. There's a particularly well-documented story about Ann and Hope, a discount retailer in Cumberland, Rhode Island, founded by Martin Chase. Their store is credited by many retail historians as one of the very first true discount stores in America. And Walton, in the late 1950s, made a deliberate journey all the way to Rhode Island, specifically to study Hope's operation. He spent hours meticulously walking the store, notepad in hand, observing every detail. He even engaged the manager in conversation, asking probing questions. Upon returning home, he diligently documented everything he had seen. He repeated this methodical process at early Kmart locations, at Two Guys, and at Caldor. Indeed, every significant discount retailer operating in America during the late 1950s and early 1960s received an unannounced visit from a short, unassuming man in a pickup truck from Arkansas, armed with a notepad and an insatiable curiosity. He also paid multiple visits to Saul Price's pioneering FedMart stores in California. And Price was the undeniable retail genius who would later invent the warehouse club model with Price Club, the precursor to Costco. Walton visited FedMart multiple times, taking copious notes, and later confided that Saul Price was the retailer he admired most in America. Years later, when Walton launched his own warehouse club format, Sam's Club, which opened its doors in 1983, he named it after himself, but privately acknowledged that the underlying concept was entirely Price's. For Walton, this wasn't about a lack of creativity, but a fundamental belief in the democratic nature of a good idea. When directly confronted in his autobiography about whether he had copied his competitors, Walton's response was essentially a forthright, "Yes, and I'm not sorry about it." His actual logic behind this approach is worth deeply understanding, and as it was far more sophisticated than simple imitation. Walton fundamentally believed that truly good retail ideas were not proprietary. They were, in his view, observable facts about how customers inherently behaved and what they truly desired. The self-service layout, he reasoned, worked not because any single retailer invented it, but because customers genuinely preferred the autonomy of selecting their own products. Similarly, the discount model succeeded not due to some esoteric business insight, but because customers responded to consistently low prices in predictable and profoundly powerful ways. If an idea worked, it worked because it was rooted in a fundamental truth about human behavior and market dynamics. And if it was true, Walton believed, anyone could and should use it. What he added to these borrowed ideas, and this is the crucial part that transmuted mere copying into utter market dominance, was an almost fanatical operational obsession. He didn't just passively adopt self-service layouts. He spent years meticulously refining exactly how products should be positioned within them, optimizing every square foot for customer flow and impulse buys. He didn't simply embrace the discount model. He engineered a logistics and distribution infrastructure of unparalleled efficiency that allowed him to relentlessly undercut competitors on price by margins they simply couldn't match. Those notepad visits to competitor stores were merely the initial step, intelligence gathering. The real transformative work happened back in Bentonville, long after the visits, in the relentless pursuit of perfection and efficiency. Walton was also an obsessive reader of every conceivable retail trade publication, every industry journal, every conference paper presenting new findings, every published analysis of retail trends. Walton consumed all of it with an insatiable appetite. He attended industry conferences not primarily to network, but to seek out individuals who possessed knowledge he didn't, engaging them over lunch to extract every valuable insight, and then bringing that distilled wisdom back home. One specific competitive intelligence operation vividly illustrates his methodical approach. In 1967, Walmart was still a relatively small regional chain, consisting of just 17 stores all located within Arkansas. Kmart, by contrast, boasted hundreds of locations nationwide. Undeterred by the disparity in size, Walton drove to a Kmart in a neighboring state. He walked in and spent the better part of a day meticulously studying their checkout system, specifically focusing on how Kmart's registers efficiently handled high transaction volumes during peak hours. He was grappling with a persistent checkout bottleneck problem in his own stores and was determined to learn how Kmart had solved it. He then drove to a second Kmart location and then a third, repeating his detailed observations. His store managers knew this was expected of them. Walton didn't want managers who merely sat in their offices reviewing spreadsheets. He demanded managers who were out in the field, actively scouting competitor stores, observing what was working, and bringing those insights back. The culmination of all this systematic intelligence gathering was a highly dynamic, unwritten retail operating manual, and it existed not on paper, but in the collective, constantly updated heads of Walton and his senior team, perpetually refined by observation and execution. But while he mastered the how of retail from others, Sam's true genius emerged in his decision of where to compete. This made it impossibly hard for competitors to copy, precisely because its essence wasn't codified anywhere. But perhaps the most important thing Walton copied, the strategic insight that truly built the empire, wasn't a store layout or an efficient checkout system. It was the revolutionary idea of where to locate his stores. Kmart's strategy, rooted in conventional wisdom, was inherently suburban. They built their large format stores in or near major population centers, cities with populations exceeding 50,000, or within the bustling suburban rings surrounding larger metropolitan areas. This was the accepted retail dogma. You needed density to support a large format store. Walton, however, observed this strategy and concluded it harbored a massive blind spot. There were hundreds of American towns with populations ranging between 5,000 and 25,000. These were towns considered too small for Kmart to bother with, and simultaneously too far from major metropolitan areas for residents to conveniently shop elsewhere. These towns, Walton realized, possessed real, often underestimated purchasing power. They simply had nowhere convenient to spend it. What if, he mused, you built in those towns? What if you owned the only discount store within a 30-mile radius? Well, what if your competitive set wasn't the formidable Kmart, because Kmart wasn't there, but rather the local hardware store and the quaint five and dime that couldn't possibly begin to match your prices? That, Walton understood, was not merely a retail strategy. That was, in its purest form, a monopoly strategy. And it is precisely what Sam Walton built with ruthless efficiency. On July 2nd, 1962, a pivotal moment in retail history occurred. Sam Walton officially opened Walmart Discount City in Rogers, Arkansas. Rogers, at the time, had a modest population of about 5,400 people. The store itself occupied a converted building on a nondescript commercial strip at the edge of town. Signage was hand-lettered, and in a move of characteristic frugality, Sam had shortened the name to Walmart, simply because it cost less to buy and maintain fewer neon letters. The floor was plain concrete, and the lighting, while adequate, was certainly not designed to impress. By any objective standard, it appeared to be a fairly ordinary discount store in a fairly ordinary small town. Yet, three fundamental elements set it dramatically apart from everything else operating in American retail in 1962. The first, and perhaps most immediately striking, was price. Walton had spent years meticulously calculating exactly how low he could price products while still maintaining a viable, profitable business. His formula was deceptively simple, yet ruthlessly effective. Buy in the largest possible volume, accept the smallest possible margin, and, most importantly, charge the customer less than any alternative they had within driving distance. At the Rogers store, this translated into prices that were genuinely shocking to customers who had, their entire lives, been accustomed to paying the higher markups of traditional variety stores. Products that routinely cost $1 at the local five and dime were available for 70 cents or 75 cents at Walmart. This significant and consistent price gap extended across the entire store and encompassing basic household items, clothing, and hardware. The second differentiator was selection, an aspect that is often overshadowed in the dominant Walmart narrative, which tends to focus almost exclusively on price. But the very first Walmart was also offering an astonishing range of products that no single local retailer in Rogers, Arkansas, could possibly match. Hardware, clothing, housewares, toys, health products, and automotive supplies were all available under one roof, and critically, all at discount prices. The sheer convenience value of this one-stop shopping experience alone was significant. But when that unparalleled convenience was coupled with the unbeatable price advantage, it created an offering that was genuinely irresistible to the small-town consumer. The third, and arguably the most vital, a differentiator, was Walton himself. He was perpetually present in that store, not sequestered in an office, reviewing reports, or locked away in endless meetings. He was constantly on the floor, engaging in direct conversations with customers, meticulously observing how they navigated the space, noticing which products they picked up and then put back, which displays truly captured their attention, and which checkout lanes became backed up. He was, in effect, running continuous, real-time behavioral research within his own store every single day he was there. He also interacted with his employees in the same direct, informal manner as his customers, speaking to them with what everyone who worked for him described as genuine interest. He made it a point to know the names of employees, not just in one store, but across multiple states, and he personally visited every store he could possibly reach, often piloting his own small plane across Arkansas and the surrounding states, dropping in unannounced, walking the floor, and engaging with whoever was present. He famously referred to his employees as associates. This was not, in 1962, common practice in the retail sector. The word associate implied a partnership, a shared stake in the enterprise, rather than the more hierarchical employer-employee relationship that defined how most retailers treated their hourly workers. But Sam knew that personal charisma alone couldn't sustain an empire. He needed a backbone of steel to support his growing reach. We will, of course, revisit whether the word ultimately matched the reality of employee treatment. By 1969, a mere 7 years after the groundbreaking Rogers opening, Walmart had expanded to 18 stores, all strategically located within Arkansas. This pace might not be considered explosive growth by modern standards, but Walton was expanding with deliberate, painstaking care, always remaining within the geographic range that his nascent distribution infrastructure could reliably support. He had learned a profound and painful lesson from the Newport experience, that building something remarkable only to lose control of it was far worse than building slowly and securely. He was also, concurrently, meticulously constructing the very infrastructure that would eventually enable truly explosive growth. In 1970, Walmart achieved another critical milestone. It opened its first dedicated distribution center, a massive warehouse complex situated in Bentonville. From this central hub, merchandise could be efficiently delivered to all its stores within a day's truck drive. While the concept of a distribution center was not revolutionary on its own, what made Walmart's implementation truly groundbreaking was the sophisticated geographic strategy it enabled. Most retail chains in the 1960s and 1970s expanded along established population corridors, diligently following highway infrastructure and targeting metropolitan areas that generated high foot traffic. Walmart's distribution center model dictated a fundamentally different approach. Every new store had to be located within a day's drive of the distribution center. Consequently, Walmart expanded in concentric circles, fanning outward from Bentonville, systematically filling in the rural market comprehensively before moving on to the next ring of towns. And the result was a unique kind of rural market saturation that no competitor had ever attempted, nor could easily replicate. By the time a competitor, perhaps observing from a Detroit headquarters, finally noticed that Walmart was inexorably dominating retail in, say, rural Missouri, Walmart had already methodically locked up every viable location in that entire region. To compete, that competitor would have to construct an entirely new distribution center of their own to serve those isolated markets, wait for existing lease terms to expire, and then attempt to compete on price against a company that had already spent a decade meticulously optimizing its supply chain specifically for those exact rural locations. The barrier to entry that Walton had so ingeniously constructed wasn't brand loyalty or cutting-edge technology, as it was a powerful combination of geography fused with logistics. He had, in essence, owned the strategic locations long before anyone else even realized those locations truly mattered. If geography was the battlefield, then information was the weapon that ensured Walton's victory. But Walmart's logistical moat wasn't just built on asphalt and warehouses, it was beamed directly from space. In the mid-1980s, Sam Walton made a move that seemed completely out of character for a man famous for his extreme frugality. He literally gagged at the price tag, but ultimately authorized a staggering $24 million investment to build the largest private, integrated satellite communication network in the United States. Completed in 1987, this system linked all stores, distribution centers, and the Bentonville headquarters via a single communications satellite orbiting 23,300 miles above the equator. Suddenly, Walmart had a godlike view of its entire empire. This network allowed them to transmit audio and video signals, speed up credit card transactions, and meticulously track their fleet of delivery trucks. Most importantly, it enabled the daily, real-time transfer of sales and inventory data directly to headquarters and distribution centers, allowing for immediate replenishment. Walton's empire was no longer just a regional retail chain. It had become a highly synchronized, high-tech machine, operating at a speed its competitors simply couldn't comprehend. Also in 1970, Walmart took another momentous step, going public on the New York Stock Exchange, and the initial public offering successfully raised crucial capital that funded the next wave of distribution centers and accelerated store openings. It also created the powerful mechanism through which Sam Walton himself became extraordinarily wealthy, not by simply taking vast sums of cash out of the business, but from the exponential appreciation of the shares he wisely retained as the company's value soared. Despite his burgeoning fortune, he steadfastly maintained his humble Bentonville residence, continued to drive his trusty pickup truck, and personally flew himself between stores in his small plane, still stopping at Waffle House for meals and staying in Holiday Inns. His personal frugality was genuinely authentic and, at this point, practically unnecessary. The sheer appreciation of his stock holdings was making him wealthy at a rate that his relatively modest lifestyle spending couldn't even begin to dent. By 1972, Walmart boasted 51 stores and an annual sales volume of $78 million. By 1975, that number had swelled to 125 stores, and by 1980, the company operated an impressive 276 stores, generating a staggering $1.2 billion in sales. The growth curve was not just trending upward, it was bending dramatically, indicating something genuinely different from just a successful regional retailer. Kmart, observing this relentless ascent from its opulent Detroit headquarters, was, remarkably, not particularly worried. Walmart, in their estimation, was still predominantly operating in places Kmart simply didn't want to be, small towns, rural markets, at the kind of locations where the land was cheap and, to their minds, the profits too marginal. They failed to grasp the scale of the monopoly being built, and their potential customer base seemed woefully limited. This, in retrospect, was arguably the most profound and expensive strategic miscalculation in the annals of American retail history. The true differentiator that set Walmart apart from every other aspiring discount chain wasn't merely its rock-bottom prices. It was the sophisticated, ruthlessly optimized machinery behind how those low prices were generated, and, critically, how they were sustained at an unparalleled scale. Maintaining such a formidable price advantage across thousands of sprawling stores, millions of diverse products, and billions of dollars in inventory demanded an operational infrastructure and a strategic mindset that almost all of Walmart's competitors either never conceived of or simply failed to build. While the giants in Detroit looked down at the small-town retailer, they failed to see the ruthless machinery being assembled under the hood of those modest blue boxes. Let's dissect the components of that groundbreaking machinery. At its very foundation lay Walmart's approach to supplier negotiation, a method so aggressive and unconventional that, from its earliest days, it fundamentally reshaped the consumer goods industry. For the better part of the 20th century, the prevailing model in retail was almost a gentleman's agreement. A manufacturer, often a prominent national brand, would dictate a wholesale price for their product. Retailers, in turn, would pay roughly that price, apply their own markup, and then sell the goods to consumers. In this dynamic, the manufacturer wielded the lion's share of pricing power. They established the cost floor. Retailers typically competed on factors like customer service, store ambience, and merchandise selection, and rather than engaging in a brutal race to undercut each other on price, Walmart shattered this long-standing equilibrium at the wholesale level, completely rewriting the rules. The core mechanism of this disruption was sheer volume. By the late 1970s, Walmart's purchasing power had reached a staggering level. The company was placing orders so immense that a single Walmart contract could represent a substantial percentage, often 15% or more, of a mid-sized manufacturer's total annual revenue. Imagine a company producing laundry detergent, dish soap, or basic apparel. Losing that crucial Walmart contract meant instantly forfeiting 15% of your yearly income, a devastating blow that could cripple operations overnight. This profound dependency granted Walmart an almost unimaginable negotiating leverage, and a power that Sam Walton and his buyers exploited without hesitation or sentimentality. Walmart's cadre of buyers, the individuals tasked with securing goods from suppliers, operated under an uncompromising, almost Spartan mandate. Secure the lowest possible price. Not a good price, not a fair price, but the absolute lowest price achievable. The expectation was crystal clear and annually reinforced. Prices were to decrease, never merely hold steady. Any efficiency gains a supplier made in their factories, any logistical improvements, any economies of scale achieved through increased production, Walmart expected to capture the vast majority of those savings directly through reduced wholesale prices. Suppliers who dared to resist this relentless pressure swiftly found their contracts terminated. Similarly, and those who agreed to the terms but then struggled to maintain the required quality standards also lost the contract. This was a continuous, brutal, and unforgiving culling process. A particularly telling detail about Walmart's supplier negotiations vividly illustrates the company's laser focus on this power dynamic. For years, as documented by numerous former suppliers and even in Walmart's own internal descriptions, buyers would meet with suppliers in small, deliberately Spartan rooms at the Bentonville headquarters. There was no comfortable seating, no offer of coffee or hospitality, no attempt to foster a collaborative atmosphere. The supplier would sit across a small functional table from the Walmart buyer, and who would make it explicitly and immediately clear that the singular purpose of the meeting was to discuss how the supplier would further reduce its prices. These rooms were not just meeting spaces, they were designed psychological tools, communicating an undeniable truth. You are here on our terms. This is not a partnership. This is a price negotiation, and we fully intend to win it. Sam Walton himself articulated this supplier relationship with a clarity that was almost admirable in its stark honesty. He said his job was to buy merchandise as cheaply as possible so he could sell it to his customers as cheaply as possible. The manufacturer's profit margin was not his concern. The manufacturer's employee wages were not his concern. The manufacturer's long-term viability was not his concern. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake, but rather the logical extension of a deeply coherent business philosophy. For Walmart, the customer was the sole, paramount stakeholder. Every other consideration, supplier margins, employee wages, the health of local economies, was viewed purely as a cost, an expense to be minimized in unwavering service of offering the absolute lowest possible price to the consumer. The second foundational component of Walmart's price-driving machinery was its revolutionary distribution system. By the mid-1980s, Walmart had meticulously constructed a formidable network of massive regional distribution centers. Each of these colossal facilities spanned an area roughly equivalent to 17 football fields and was strategically positioned so that every single Walmart store could be reached within a day's truck drive. And this was a radical departure from conventional retail expansion. Most retail chains throughout the 1960s and 70s typically expanded along established population corridors, following major highway infrastructures and concentrating in metro areas that already generated high foot traffic. Walmart's unique distribution model dictated a different strategy entirely. Every new store had to be situated within a day's drive of a distribution center, leading Walmart to expand in ever-widening concentric circles, radiating outward from Bentonville. This allowed them to comprehensively saturate rural markets before moving on to the next ring of expansion. But building these massive distribution centers was only half the equation. The real genius lay in what happened inside them, or rather, what didn't happen. Walmart masterfully adapted a logistics technique known as cross-docking, turning what was a specialized shipping method into the heartbeat of their retail operation. Instead of holding goods in a warehouse where they would gather dust and incur heavy storage fees, inbound shipments from suppliers were unloaded, immediately sorted, and seamlessly reloaded directly onto outbound trucks headed for stores. Products rarely touched the warehouse floor, often moving in and out of the facility within a mere 24 hours. By 1992, an astonishing 85% of Walmart's inventory was handled through this relentless system. It wasn't just a supply chain, it was a high-velocity conveyor belt. This continuous motion eliminated the need for long-term storage, slashed labor and handling costs, and dramatically accelerated inventory turnover. This single logistical masterpiece allowed Walmart to trim 2 to 3% off its overall operating costs, a margin that, when compounded across billions of dollars in sales, became an insurmountable competitive moat. The outcome was an unprecedented level of rural market penetration that no competitor had ever attempted, nor could easily replicate. By the time a competitor even recognized that Walmart was systematically dominating retail in, say, rural Missouri, Walmart had already methodically locked up every viable location. To even begin to compete, a rival would have to undertake the enormous capital expenditure of building its own distribution center to serve those geographically dispersed markets, then wait for existing lease terms to expire, and then compete on price against a company that had already spent a decade meticulously optimizing its supply chain specifically for those exact locations. The barrier to entry. Sam Walton painstakingly built wasn't based on ephemeral brand loyalty or cutting-edge technology. It was a physical, almost insurmountable moat forged from a brilliant combination of geography and logistics. He owned the crucial retail locations long before anyone else even understood their strategic importance. To fuel this physical expansion, Walton needed a financial engine that matched his operational ambition. In 1970, Walmart made its debut on the New York Stock Exchange. The IPO successfully raised substantial capital, which was immediately channeled into funding the next aggressive wave of distribution center construction and new store openings. And the public offering also established the mechanism through which Sam Walton amassed his extraordinary wealth. This fortune wasn't derived from extracting money directly from the business, but rather from the exponential appreciation of the shares he wisely retained as the company's value skyrocketed. Despite his burgeoning net worth, Walton famously maintained his humble lifestyle. He continued to live in Bentonville, drove a pickup truck, piloted his own small plane between stores, ate at Waffle House, and stayed in Holiday Inns. His personal frugality was undoubtedly genuine, but by this point, it was also practically unnecessary. The sheer, unprecedented growth in his stock portfolio was generating wealth at a rate that his personal spending, no matter how extravagant it might have become, simply couldn't dent. And this massive financial and operational advantage meant Walmart possessed incredible pricing flexibility. It could, for instance, price identical products 20% lower than Kmart and still generate the same profit per sale. Alternatively, it could price items similarly to Kmart and reap 20% more profit per sale, or any combination in between. The strategic choice Walmart consistently and persistently made across every market it entered was to pass the vast majority of this inherent advantage directly to the customer through lower prices. They then leveraged the resulting explosion in sales volume to widen the cost gap even further. This was the legendary Walmart flywheel in action. Lower prices attracted more customers. More customers translated into increased sales volume. Greater volume, in turn, led to even more potent supplier leverage and enhanced distribution efficiency. This amplified leverage and efficiency resulted in still lower operational costs, which then enabled Walmart to offer even lower prices. Once this virtuous flywheel began spinning at full velocity, it became an essentially unstoppable force, rendering any competitor operating on conventional retail economics utterly helpless. But as the Walmart flywheel spun faster, generating billions in revenue and lowering prices to historic levels, it created a powerful centrifugal force that began to tear at the very heart of the American small town. And the communities themselves? Those small towns nestled between Walmart's cavernous parking lots and what used to be their vibrant downtowns. They were about to learn precisely what unstoppable truly meant. There exists a seminal study, cited so frequently by retail economists that it has become a landmark in the literature on Walmart's impact. Conducted by economist Kenneth Stone of Iowa State University, initially published in 1988 and meticulously updated throughout the 1990s, Stone gained unprecedented access to detailed retail sales data for Iowa towns during the critical period when Walmart first entered the state. His findings, systematically observed across hundreds of towns, painted a stark picture. In the decade following a Walmart store opening in a given Iowa county, total retail sales in the surrounding small towns plummeted by an average of 25%. Some categories suffered far more catastrophic declines. Hardware stores, for example, saw average revenues drop by over 50%. Variety stores, the beloved five and dimes that had served as anchors for small-town main streets for a century, were effectively eliminated from the landscape. Crucially, the towns themselves didn't necessarily lose sales entirely. Rather, the sales moved. They migrated en masse from the quaint main street shops to the sprawling Walmart parking lot on the edge of town. The economic mechanism behind this shift was disarmingly simple and, from a strictly market-centric perspective, entirely logical. Walmart was offering products at significantly lower prices. Customers, acting as rational economic agents, understandably preferred lower prices. Consequently, they stopped patronizing their local hardware store and instead began doing their shopping at Walmart. The local hardware store's revenue collapsed, leading inevitably to its closure. From the individual customer's viewpoint, each transaction was eminently rational. Saving $3 on a box of screws or $8 on a pair of jeans seemed like a sensible financial decision. However, the aggregate sum of these countless individually rational decisions was nothing less than the systematic, relentless destruction of the local commercial ecosystem. Now, this is where the analysis genuinely becomes complicated. Walmart's staunchest defenders often make a compelling point. A customer's money is, ultimately, their own money. If they can purchase the same product for less at Walmart, the additional dollars they save don't simply vanish. Instead, they are typically spent elsewhere, perhaps on a restaurant meal, on school supplies, or on a much-needed home repair. Thus, the argument goes, the local economy doesn't necessarily shrink. It merely reallocates its resources. This argument, on its surface, possesses a certain merit. The critical problem, however, lies in what it conveniently omits. The local hardware store was never just a place to buy screws. It represented the hardware store owner's entire livelihood, the culmination of years of hard work and investment. It provided 2 or 3 employees with steady jobs, and the wages earned from those jobs were almost entirely spent within the local economy, at the diner, the gas station, the local grocery store. When the hardware store closed, those wages and that crucial economic activity vanished from local circulation. While replacement jobs might emerge at Walmart, they were often different in specific, financially critical ways that we will explore in greater detail later. Furthermore, the hardware store owner had been an active member of the local Chamber of Commerce, a generous donor to local charities, and a proud sponsor of the Little League team. The Walmart store manager, by contrast, was an employee of a vast corporation headquartered hundreds of miles away in Bentonville, Arkansas, and whose profits flowed directly back to Bentonville, not to the community where the store resided. This was the invisible vacuum, a machine designed to harvest local wealth and transplant it to an Arkansas balance sheet. And this is the often overlooked extractive quality of the Walmart model that the customers save money argument frequently misses. Yes, customers paid less, but the money they saved was recaptured by Walmart's margin, which then left the local community entirely. The local business model, though sometimes imperfect, occasionally inefficient, and often more expensive, at least kept money circulating within the local economy for several cycles before it eventually flowed out. Walmart, by design, extracted it immediately and completely. The profound human dimension of this transformation is rarely, if ever, adequately captured in purely economic studies. Consider the town of Estherville, Iowa, with a population of approximately 6,000, a representative example of hundreds of similar cases across rural America. And before Walmart arrived in the region in the late 1980s, downtown Estherville boasted a robust, functioning commercial core: a hardware store, various clothing shops, a pharmacy, a bustling variety store, a beloved diner, and a shoe store. The downtown was more than just a place to shop. It was where people congregated on Saturdays, a vital social space as much as a commercial one. By the mid-1990s, most of those cherished businesses were gone. Their buildings stood empty, silent monuments to a bygone era. The downtown, though physically intact, had become commercially hollow. The Walmart, meanwhile, was thriving, having absorbed virtually all the business that had previously been distributed across those independent shops. Local residents interviewed in subsequent years expressed conflicting sentiments. Yes, home prices were undeniably lower at Walmart, and the selection was certainly broader. Yet, they also spoke of an intangible loss, something that was gone and wasn't coming back. The social fabric of the downtown, the place where you invariably ran into people you knew, where the shopkeeper would inquire about your kids, where commerce and community were inextricably intertwined, that vital essence had vanished. Such a loss cannot be quantified in a regression analysis, but it manifests in other, equally troubling ways. In studies revealing higher rates of social isolation in communities stripped of their commercial centers, in research indicating reduced civic participation, lower voter turnout, and declining membership in local organizations in areas with high Walmart penetration, and in demographics studies showing accelerating population decline in small towns that have lost their economic bases. Sam Walton was keenly aware of these criticisms. He addressed them in his autobiography with a curious blend of genuine engagement and fundamental dismissal. His central argument was that the local businesses that ultimately closed in Walmart's wake had, for decades, been overcharging customers. He contended that the community being mourned was, in part, a construct built upon consumers paying more than necessary for basic goods, and that such a system was simply not worth preserving at the customer's expense. There is an undeniable kernel of truth in this assertion. Some local retailers were inefficient, and many were expensive precisely because they faced little to no competitive pressure and leaving customers with few alternatives. The pervasive sentimentality surrounding Main Street America sometimes conveniently overlooks the reality that Main Street America was not always cheap, nor was it always particularly well served. Sam saw himself as a liberator of the consumer's wallet, but he failed to see that he was also dismantling the architecture of their town. However, Walton's argument conveniently ceased before subjecting its replacement, the Walmart store itself, the wages it paid, and its corporate structure, to the very same standards of scrutiny. Because if the true question is whether customers are well served by the post-Walmart small-town economy, the answer is considerably more complicated than prices alone might suggest. In many rural communities, Walmart itself evolved into the only viable retail option, as the local businesses had shuttered, and any potential competitors who might have filled the void never materialized because Walmart's omnipresence made the economics unworkable. The choices customers had made, rationally, individually, and seemingly correctly in each transaction, had collectively produced a situation where they now possessed but a single option. And one option, regardless of the prices it charges, defines a monopoly. But the devastation of the American small town wasn't limited to the storefronts on Main Street. It was quietly spreading to the factory floors that had long been the backbone of the rural economy. In 1985, Sam Walton made a public pledge that was genuinely unusual for an American retailer of his stature. He announced a Buy American campaign, a Walmart commitment to preferentially source products from American manufacturers. Stores would display prominent signage. Vendors would be rigorously vetted for domestic production. The company even declared it would pay a modest premium for American-made goods rather than automatically defaulting to the absolute cheapest available global option. The campaign was undoubtedly real in the sense that it materialized, generating significant positive press coverage and public goodwill. Walton, at some fundamental level, genuinely believed in American manufacturing, and he belonged to a generation and hailed from a geography where buying American was perceived as both sound economic sense and a core patriotic identity. Yet, this campaign was, in a structural sense, inherently temporary. The very same relentless forces that enabled Walmart to offer lower prices than its retail competitors were also powerfully at play within the manufacturing market, and those forces pointed unequivocally in one direction: China. Consider the stark economic reality of American manufacturing in the mid-1980s. An American factory producing basic consumer goods, clothing, housewares, rudimentary electronics, toys, was operating with labor costs roughly 10 to 15 times higher than a comparable Chinese factory producing identical goods. And the American factory also contended with a host of other expenses: stringent environmental regulations, comprehensive safety regulations, and federally mandated minimum wage requirements. The Chinese factory, especially in the nascent years of China's economic opening, bore almost none of those costs. For a retailer whose entire business model was predicated on being cheaper than everyone else, this wasn't a theoretical concern. It was an existential dilemma. The friction between Sam's patriotic ideals and the cold mathematics of the bottom line could only last so long. If Walmart adhered strictly to paying a premium for American-made goods, while its competitors increasingly sourced from China, those competitors would eventually become cheaper than Walmart. And being cheaper than Walmart was simply not a position Sam Walton was willing to occupy. The Buy American campaign, in any truly meaningful scale, lasted for roughly 5 years. By the early 1990s, and particularly after Walton's passing in 1992, Walmart's sourcing strategy had shifted decisively toward China and other low-cost manufacturing nations. The numbers that subsequently emerged were staggering. By 2004, Walmart was importing approximately $18 billion worth of goods from China annually. This single figure alone represented roughly 10% of all U.S. imports from China for that year. Walmart, by itself, had become one of China's largest trading partners, not just one of America's largest importers, but one of China's most significant export customers. The Economic Policy Institute, a labor-focused think tank, published a study in 2004 estimating that Walmart's China sourcing had displaced approximately 196,000 American manufacturing jobs between 2001 and 2006. While other economists debated the precise methodology and the exact number, no serious analyst disputed the overall direction or the profound significance of Walmart's influence. Walmart's purchasing decisions were unequivocally a major driver in the accelerating shift of American manufacturing toward offshore production. The mechanism was the familiar one. The same ruthless supplier leverage that had previously driven down domestic supplier prices was now applied globally. Once Walmart's buyers began seriously engaging with Chinese manufacturers, the price differential they could present to American suppliers became devastatingly clear. As imagine the scene: a Walmart buyer, sitting across the table from an American factory owner, lays out the stark reality. Here is the identical product, manufactured in Guangdong province, at a landed cost in the US of $X. Your cost, for the same product made here, is 1.5 times X. You have 6 months to match this price, or we will move all our business. Some American manufacturers, in a desperate bid for survival, invested heavily in automation and managed to stay marginally competitive. But for many, It was an impossible ask. The factories closed. The jobs migrated to Guangdong, to Zhejiang, to the burgeoning manufacturing cities along China's eastern coast. The Chinese manufacturers who successfully secured Walmart's business, however, were not immune to the pressure. Yet Walmart's buyers didn't ease up on the squeezing once production moved offshore. They applied the same relentless demands to Chinese factories as they had to American ones. The crucial difference was that the floor, the minimum viable operating cost for a Chinese factory, was so dramatically lower than for an American one. Consequently, the prices Walmart was able to extract while still keeping those Chinese factories viable were simply unbeatable by any domestic American manufacturer. A fascinating supply chain detail further illustrates the sheer operational scale involved. Walmart's global sourcing office in Shenzhen, China, established in 2002, employed hundreds of dedicated staff whose sole purpose was to identify, qualify, and negotiate with Chinese manufacturers. This office managed thousands of supplier relationships, all functioning, in essence, as an industrial-scale purchasing machine, permanently dedicated to unearthing the lowest possible prices within China's vast manufacturing economy. The profound consequences of this sourcing shift cascaded down onto American communities that often had a deeply complicated relationship with Walmart's retail presence. Textile towns in the Carolinas, which had supplied American retailers with basic clothing for generations, saw their factories succumb to Chinese competition, a process dramatically accelerated by Walmart's purchasing decisions. Furniture manufacturing towns throughout North Carolina and Virginia watched as their plants shuttered. Consumer electronics assembly, once a feature of the American Midwest, relocated to Chinese contract manufacturers who could supply Walmart at prices domestic producers simply couldn't touch. And here lies the specific, cruel irony of the geography. Many of the towns most severely impacted by Walmart's Chinese sourcing decisions were precisely the same category of small, rural American communities that Walmart's retail stores were simultaneously serving. The factory jobs that had provided the stable income base for these rural communities were vanishing, moving to China, while the Walmart store in that very same community was providing low-price retail options to the increasingly lower-income population left behind. The customer saving money at Walmart was, in many painful instances, the exact same individual whose factory job had been eliminated by Walmart's global sourcing strategy. The lower prices were, in part, funded by the elimination of the very wages that had previously allowed that customer to afford goods at higher prices. This was not a minor irony. It was a fundamental structural feature of the system Walmart had constructed, a system that, at sufficient scale, contained its own macabre form of demand management. By relentlessly driving down manufacturing wages through its sourcing pressure, Walmart directly contributed to the income compression that, in turn, made its own low-price model even more indispensable for the customers it purported to serve. It was a perfect, self-reinforcing loop, a cycle where the loss of a middle-class wage made the low prices of the blue box not just a choice, but a necessity. Sam Walton likely didn't design this specific, full-scale outcome, yet the ultimate consequences weren't fully visible in 1962, nor perhaps even in 1985 when he publicly made the Buy American pledge. However, the underlying logic was present from the very beginning. In the uncompromising supplier negotiation philosophy, in the relentless margin compression doctrine, and in the absolute priority of the customer's price above every other consideration in the supply chain. The Buy American campaign was genuine in its intent, but in retrospect, it represents the final, fleeting moment when Walmart's leadership truly wrestled with the inherent trade-off between its dominant pricing model and its profound impact on American manufacturing. While the shift accelerated after 1992, the writing was already on the wall. Sam's own relentless demand for lower prices had inadvertently doomed the very American factories he hoped to save. To understand the complex relationship between Walmart and its massive workforce, we must travel back to the early 1960s, to the very first stores in Arkansas. It was here that Sam Walton introduced a term that would become a cornerstone of his corporate identity, the associate. In the nascent days of the company, this wasn't just a corporate euphemism. Inspired by the profit-sharing models he had observed at other successful retailers like JCPenney, Walton genuinely wanted to foster a sense of partnership. He believed that if employees felt they had a stake in the game, they would work harder, smile more at customers, and keep the stores cleaner. He famously said that the way management treats the associates is exactly how the associates will treat the customers. In this era, Sam was often on the floor, knowing every employee's name, and their spouse's name, and their children's birthdays. The associate was meant to be a member of an extended family, a partner in a shared mission to bring low prices to the common man. However, as the 1960s gave way to the 1970s and Walmart began its rapid expansion, the family grew too large for personal handshakes. With growth came the first whispers of organized labor. For Sam Walton, the idea of a union was not just an economic threat, it was a personal affront. He viewed a union as a third party that would drive a wedge between him and his associates, destroying the direct, folksy communication he cherished. In the early 1970s, as the first serious unionization efforts appeared at distribution centers, Walton made a decisive strategic move. He hired John Tate, a legendary anti-union consultant. And Tate's philosophy was simple. The best way to stop a union is to never let it get through the door. Under Tate's guidance, Walmart began to codify its labor relations manual. Every manager was trained to spot the early warning signs of organizing: hushed conversations in the break room, employees lingering in the parking lot after shifts, or a sudden change in morale. This was the birth of the Union Probability Index, UPI. Bentonville began to track its stores not just by sales volume, but by their vulnerability to union influence. If a store's UPI spiked, it triggered a response from the Bentonville Command. By the 1980s, Walmart had perfected its counteroffensive machinery. The company established specialized labor relations strike teams based in the Bentonville headquarters. These were not HR clerks. They were high-level specialists trained in the art of corporate persuasion and legal maneuvering. When a hotline tip or a high UPI score flagged a store, these teams would be dispatched via the company's private fleet of jets. They would descend upon a store within 24 to 48 hours. Their arrival was designed to be overwhelming. They would conduct educational sessions, showing videos that portrayed unions as predatory entities that only wanted dues and offered nothing in return. They subtly reminded workers that in a low-margin business like Walmart, any increase in labor costs could lead to the ultimate consequence: the store becoming unprofitable and being forced to close. During this decade, the gap between the associate language and the daily reality began to widen, and the folksy charm remained in the company's Saturday morning meetings and the Walmart cheer. But the operational core was becoming a high-tech, data-driven machine that prioritized the everyday low price above all else, including the wages of those wearing the blue vests. By the time Sam Walton passed away in 1992, he had left behind a workforce that was the largest in America, yet one of the least empowered. He had successfully kept the unions at bay, creating a culture where loyalty to the Walmart family was paramount, even as that family began to struggle. Sam's core wage philosophy remained unchanged until his death. The best way to help workers was to grow the company. He believed that by building more stores, he was creating more jobs, and that was a greater service than raising the hourly pay of the existing ones. And he once remarked that he didn't believe in sharing the wealth in the traditional sense, but in creating wealth through growth. In his final years, the associate was still a term of pride in corporate manuals. But the math of the blue box was becoming relentless. The wages were hovering just above the poverty line, and the scheduling systems were becoming so optimized that full-time status was becoming a rare privilege. Sam Walton drove his old truck and ate at Waffle House, a billionaire who lived like his workers. But while his lifestyle was a choice, for the 1.4 million people who would follow in his footsteps into the 21st century, that modesty was a mandate enforced by the very machinery he had built. As the 1990s ended and the new millennium dawned, and the labor relations tactics Sam had pioneered would be put to their ultimate, brutal test. The associate was about to find out exactly what happened when they took the word partnership too literally. As the new millennium dawned, the the sophisticated anti-union machinery Sam Walton had envisioned was put to its most brutal test. In a small Walmart store in Jacksonville, Texas, a group of 10 meat cutters achieved what was once thought impossible. They voted 7-3 to join the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. It was the first time in American history that a segment of Walmart's workforce had successfully organized. The celebration lasted less than a week. In a move that sent shockwaves through the labor movement, and Walmart's headquarters in Bentonville announced it was eliminating its in-house meat cutting departments in 180 stores across the region, shifting exclusively to prepackaged meat. The skilled meat cutters in Jacksonville were suddenly reclassified as general sales associates. Walmart claimed the move was a long-planned cost-cutting measure, but the message was delivered with surgical precision. If you organize a department, that department will cease to exist. The Jacksonville strategy was just the beginning. In 2005, the battleground moved north to Jonquière, Quebec. After months of intense organizing, the employees became the first in North America to successfully negotiate a full union contract. Walmart's response was the nuclear option. Rather than operating under a union contract, Walmart abruptly closed the entire store, firing all 190 employees. They officially attributed the closure to economic reasons, but a decade-long legal battle eventually reached the Supreme Court of Canada. In 2014, the court ruled that Walmart had violated labor laws by firing the workers without a justifiable business reason. But for the people of Jonquière, the victory was hollow. The store was gone, the jobs were gone, and the blue box stood as a silent, empty monument to the price of defiance. The chilling lesson permeated every break room across North America. Unionize, and the store dies. While the company fought unions on the ground, a different crisis was brewing in the numbers. By 2004, the average Walmart associate was earning approximately $9.68 per hour. For a full-time worker supporting a family of 4, this meant living a life tethered to the federal poverty line. But full-time was becoming a myth. Walmart's computerized assistant manager, a sophisticated scheduling algorithm, was now dictating the lives of 1.4 million Americans. By granularity analyzing foot traffic, the system would schedule associates for 28, 32, or 34 hours, just enough to keep the store running, but not enough for the employees to qualify for full company benefits. This was the dark side of the everyday low price, EDLP. The savings on the shelves were being funded by the instability of the lives behind the registers. This wage compression created an unprecedented economic phenomenon. Because Walmart's wages were so low, a staggering number of its associates were forced to rely on public safety nets to survive, and a landmark 2004 report revealed that a single Walmart supercenter could cost local taxpayers between $900,000 and $1.7 million annually in public assistance for its own employees, including food stamps, Medicaid, and subsidized housing. By 2014, Americans for Tax Fairness estimated that Walmart received a hidden subsidy of $6.2 billion every year from the federal government. In a cruel twist of economic irony, the American taxpayer was unwittingly subsidizing the low prices on Walmart's shelves. The everyday low price wasn't a miracle of efficiency. It was a redistribution of costs from a multi-billion-dollar corporation to the public purse. The culture of control also extended to gender. In 2011, the company faced Dukes versus Walmart Stores, Inc., and the largest sex discrimination class action lawsuit in U.S. history. Over 1.5 million female employees alleged that Walmart's centralized, male-dominated culture systematically paid women less than men and denied them promotions. While the Supreme Court eventually blocked the class action status on procedural grounds, the evidence unraveled a grim picture of the associate family, one where women held the majority of the low-wage hourly jobs while men dominated the management suites. Sam Walton passed away in 1992, but the world he built reached its terrifying peak in the decades that followed. He believed that the paramount duty to his associates was to grow the company, convinced that a bigger Walmart meant more opportunity. But as the company reached a scale where it employed 1% of the American workforce, and that growth became a trap. The associate language once a folksy promise of partnership, had become a corporate mask for a system that extracted the maximum amount of labor for the minimum amount of cost. Sam's unwavering frugality, which he applied to his old pickup truck and his Waffle House meals, had been institutionalized into a machine that enforced poverty on millions. In the end, the Walmart model produced the greatest concentration of private wealth the world had ever seen, alongside the largest concentration of poverty wage employment in the American economy. Both were the offspring of the same philosophy, the absolute priority of the customer's price above all human cost. The Blue Box had achieved its mission. It had conquered the American small town, but in doing so, it had rewritten the American social contract into a receipt that no one could afford to pay. While the millions of associates behind the blue vests struggled to keep their heads above the poverty line, the engine of growth Sam Walton built was generating a concentration of wealth so vast it defied conventional imagination. Here is a number that demands a moment of quiet reflections to truly grasp its magnitude. The Walton family, the direct heirs of Sam Walton, specifically his daughter Alice and his sons S. Robson, Rob, and Jim, possess a combined net worth that, as of the mid-2020s, comfortably exceeds an astonishing $200 billion. To put that figure in context, the Federal Reserve regularly publishes comprehensive data on American wealth distribution, offering a granular look at economic disparities. In the years for which this staggering figure has been meticulously calculated, the Walton family's collective wealth has not merely equaled, but has consistently exceeded the total combined wealth of the bottom 40 to 42% of American households. This is not merely the bottom 40% of individual earners, and a statistic that would be significant enough. This refers to the bottom 40% of households, encompassing approximately 50 million households. To put it even more starkly, the combined net worth of these 50 million American households is roughly equivalent to what just 3 individuals inherited from a man who famously drove a pickup truck and ate at Waffle House. This extraordinary accumulation of wealth is not primarily because the Waltons have been particularly aggressive or revolutionary investors or business builders since Sam's passing. By most objective accounts, they have acted as competent and diligent stewards of the considerable Walmart stake, rather than as transformative operational strategists or risk-taking entrepreneurs. The vast majority of their wealth has grown organically, primarily because Walmart itself has grown and continued its expansion, and Walmart's consistent growth has allowed their existing share position to compound at the impressive rate of a very large, very successful public company. Sam Walton's personal wealth during his lifetime was also predominantly held in Walmart stock. He deliberately retained a substantial percentage of shares throughout the company's explosive growth, and the relentless appreciation of those shares was the primary engine of his immense wealth accumulation. His personal spending habits, which were genuinely frugal and well documented by all who knew him, meant that he was not extracting large amounts of cash from the company for personal consumption. Instead, he was systematically accumulating equity, and the meticulously planned estate planning strategies that preserved the Walton family's dominant financial position through Sam's death and into subsequent generations were highly sophisticated and entirely legally structured to minimize estate taxes. The precise mechanisms employed, including various trusts, charitable entities, and family-limited partnerships, are legally available to any American family possessing sufficient assets and the requisite expert legal advice to implement them. The Waltons, with their immense resources, utilized these tools with unparalleled expertise. But the Walton legacy isn't just about preserving wealth. It's about how that wealth is projected back onto the American landscape. Alice Walton, Sam's daughter, and has famously dedicated a significant portion of her inherited wealth to establish the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. This institution is a genuinely significant cultural landmark, attracting major works of art and garnering national and international attention for a town that was not previously on the art world's radar. Its collection has been independently assessed at well over $1 billion, and notably, the museum remains free to the public, a testament to her philanthropic vision. Jim Walton manages Harvest Bank, a substantial regional banking operation with a significant presence spanning across Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas. Reflecting a more traditional business approach, Rob Walton spent decades serving on Walmart's board of directors and occupying the esteemed position of chairman for most of that time, guiding the company through crucial periods. But the sheer scale of the Walton fortune isn't just a number on a Forbes list. It has become a profound instrument of social engineering. Through the Walton Family Foundation, established by Sam and Helen in 1987, the family has channeled their immense wealth into a highly controversial arena, the fundamental restructuring of the American K-12 education system. Their weapon of choice? Charter schools. Over the past few decades, the Waltons have poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the charter school movement, helping to fund roughly 1 in every 4 charter schools in the United States. Between 2015 and 2020 alone, they pledged a staggering $1 billion to expand this initiative. On the surface, providing alternative education for low-income students seems like noble philanthropy. But critics and labor advocates point out a devastating paradox. By aggressively pushing for charter schools and school choice, the foundation actively diverts crucial funding and resources away from traditional public school systems. And here is the ultimate bitter irony. These struggling public schools disproportionately serve the very low-income communities from which Walmart draws its minimum wage workforce. The immense wealth extracted by paying poverty wages to millions of retail workers is now being used by the Walton heirs to unilaterally dictate the educational future of those same workers' children. When questioned, foundation representatives argue that their philanthropy stands on its own merits, regardless of where the funding comes from, and a defense that eerily echoes Sam Walton's original excuse that his only job was to serve customers, not to worry about the collateral damage left in his wake. There is a specific, pivotal moment in this extraordinary wealth accumulation story that is particularly worth noting. In 1970, when Walmart first went public, Sam Walton astutely retained approximately 39% of the company's shares. The initial public offering, IPO, price was a modest $16.50 per share. By 1972, adjusted for subsequent stock splits, those shares were already worth multiples of their original IPO price, a testament to the company's early, explosive growth. To illustrate the power of this growth, and an investor who had bought a mere $1,000 worth of Walmart stock at the IPO and held it steadfastly through 2022 would have seen their initial investment swell to shares worth approximately $12 million. The relentless mathematics of that compound growth, applied to Sam Walton's substantial 39% initial position, produced the fundamental bedrock of the staggering Walton family wealth. This mathematical miracle, however, only worked for those at the top of the pyramid. In sharp contrast, the workers diligently stocking the shelves in 1970 did not possess equity positions. They were compensated with wages, not ownership stakes. The associates who tirelessly built the company's vast operational infrastructure had wages, not shares. And the countless suppliers who were systematically squeezed to lower prices did not participate in the immense share appreciation that those very lower prices enabled. The wealth created by Walmart's unprecedented growth was decidedly not distributed proportionally to the diverse array of people who collaboratively created it. Instead, it was captured primarily by the individuals who owned the equity, which means, overwhelmingly, by Sam Walton and his immediate family. This, in essence, is how American capitalism functions, and the Walton case, while extraordinary, is not entirely unique in its fundamental structure. It is, however, unusually visible and stark in its sheer scale. The profound gap between what the company's workers earned and what the company's owners accumulated is, in the case of Walmart, and one of the largest and most striking such disparities in American business history. Sam Walton famously drove a pickup truck, ate at the Waffle House, and stayed in Holiday Inn motels. He was, by all accounts, genuinely frugal in his personal habits, eschewing overt displays of opulence. Yet he simultaneously accumulated wealth at a rate that his understated lifestyle initially made almost invisible until the Forbes list annually brought his immense fortune to public light. His frugality was undeniably real, but it also functioned, at some level, as a carefully curated performance, a strategic way of presenting himself as a man of the people who, by an astonishing coincidence, happened to be the richest man in America. He was indeed a man of the people in his simple tastes and unpretentious demeanor, yet he was decidedly not a man of the people in his economic reality or his approach to wealth accumulation. As Walmart's revenue soared into the hundreds of billions, the company's unyielding demand for cost reduction began to mutate into something far more sinister. The relentless drive to slash expenses and maximize shareholder value didn't just extract a toll from the American taxpayer, it pushed the corporation into deeply unsettling territory, crossing the boundaries of ethical business practices into what critics view as rampant corporate exploitation. To truly understand the dark underbelly of the Walmart empire, one must look beyond the brightly lit aisles and rollback signs of its supercenters. Perhaps the most chilling manifestation of this ruthless culture emerged from a highly secretive financial strategy the company utilized until the mid-1990s. In a move that shocked labor advocates and the public alike, Walmart systematically took out corporate-owned life insurance policies on hundreds of thousands of its lowest-level employees, including janitors, cashiers, and stockers. The company was designated as the sole beneficiary of these policies. If an employee passed away, their grieving family received absolutely nothing from this specific insurance, while Walmart collected a massive tax-free payout. The Internal Revenue Service and numerous critics eventually discovered that the retailer was essentially trying to profit from the untimely deaths of its own workers. They exploited tax loopholes through a practice that was morbidly known within the insurance industry as dead peasants or janitor insurance. The federal government eventually closed this tax deduction loophole and aggressively pursued Walmart for back taxes, while forcing an end to the practice. However, the psychological damage to the company's carefully crafted, family-oriented image was irreversible. But while Walmart was betting on the deaths of its workers at home, it was actively endangering the lives of millions more across its global supply chain. But the corporate exploitation did not stop at the American border. Walmart's insatiable appetite for the lowest possible manufacturing costs inevitably led the company overseas, profoundly reshaping global supply chains. By outsourcing to developing nations, Walmart capitalized on environments where labor protections were virtually non-existent, setting off a devastating global race to the bottom. When China opened up to foreign investment and offering vast stretches of greenfield sites and an abundance of labor at just a fraction of Western wages, Walmart led the way in driving down compensation in supplier factories. To ruthlessly cut procurement costs, Walmart moved its global outsourcing headquarters to the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen in 2002. In China, where the vast majority of Walmart's merchandise is sourced, investigators found workers toiling in conditions that resembled 19th-century sweatshops. Researchers interviewing employees at Walmart supplier factories outside Shenzhen found workers making an average of just 59 cents per hour. Many were subjected to fraudulent piece rate systems where they were illegally paid at a lower rate for overtime work than during their regular hours. Believing they would earn more the harder they labored, yet these workers were actually trapped in an exhausting, frantic race to survive, manipulated by unscrupulous employers trying to make a profit in the face of Walmart's intense price squeeze. Furthermore, factories routinely delayed wage payments by 2 weeks to prevent desperate, burned-out workers from quitting. And yet, the exploitation extended far beyond China. In Bangladesh, horrific reports surfaced of teenagers laboring for up to 80 hours a week in garment factories, earning a meager 14 cents per hour. The consequences of prioritizing extreme cost-cutting over human safety culminated in sheer tragedy on November 24, 2012. A devastating fire broke out at the Tazreen fashion clothing factory in Bangladesh, trapping helpless workers inside. Survivors recounted a nightmare scenario. Fire extinguishers were entirely non-functional, and exit doors were padlocked shut, and managers initially ordered panicked workers to return to their sewing machines as the alarms blared. 112 garment workers died, many leaping to their deaths from the 8-story building simply to escape the inferno. While Walmart initially claimed it could not confirm sourcing from the factory, photographic evidence from labor activists revealed Walmart-branded clothing scattered amidst the charred ruins. It was later uncovered that at least 5 supplier companies had been using the facility to produce apparel for Walmart. Even more damning, a New York Times investigation revealed that in 2011, a Walmart official had played the lead role in blocking an industry-wide effort requiring global retailers to pay more for apparel to help Bangladeshi factories improve critical electrical and fire safety systems. This culture of winning at any cost, however, was not limited to squeezing suppliers in Asia. It systematically infected Walmart's international expansion strategies. In 2012, an explosive Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation by the New York Times exposed a massive, orchestrated bribery campaign conducted by Walmart's Mexican subsidiary, Walmex. To accelerate its aggressive expansion and crush local competition, Walmex executives paid millions of dollars in bribes to mayors, city council members, and urban planners across Mexico. Sergio Cicero, a former Walmex lawyer who orchestrated the payoffs and provided corporate headquarters with detailed evidence of the scheme, he explained how the company used gestors, third-party fixers, to funnel millions to officials to bypass zoning laws, overcome environmental regulations, and expedite construction permits. An initial internal investigation by a veteran FBI agent hired by Walmart corroborated these allegations, discovering that approximately $24 million in bribes had been systematically distributed. Furthermore, they uncovered $16 million in illicit donations to local politicians and their organizations. Yet, instead of reporting the massive violations to authorities, Walmart's top executives in Bentonville, Arkansas, orchestrated a massive cover-up. Executives chafed at the investigation, complaining that bribery was simply how business was done in Mexico, and deliberately hushed up the findings to protect the company's reputation and its narrative of explosive global growth. They allowed the investigation to be concluded by a short, contradictory report from the head of Walmex, who had himself been suspected of involvement. The executives implicated in the bribery were never disciplined. Shockingly, some were even promoted. When the scandal finally broke years later, the financial and reputational fallout was catastrophic. The revelation wiped $1 billion off Walmart's market value almost overnight and triggered massive shareholder lawsuits against the company's leadership. The U.S. Justice Department launched a sweeping probe under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which quickly expanded beyond Mexico, uncovering similar illegal permit expediting and bribery schemes in Brazil and India and China. In Brazil, land and permits were obtained illegally by bribing landlords and officials. In India, Walmart suspended key executives amid an inquiry that ultimately halted its expansion in the country entirely. Walmart was forced to spend roughly $900 million on internal probes and legal fees alone, just to restructure its compliance programs. In 2019, Walmart finally agreed to pay a staggering $282.7 million to the Department of Justice and the SEC to resolve the 7-year investigation into its global corruption practices across Mexico, Brazil, China, and India. In Brazil specifically, Walmart and its subsidiary agreed to pay an additional $137 million to resolve the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act case. And this institutional disregard for the law and human safety eventually found its way back to America's front door, manifesting in a public health crisis that would cost more than just money. If exploiting foreign workers and bribing international officials wasn't enough, perhaps the most devastating domestic controversy involving the retailer unfolded not in its aisles, but at its pharmacy counters. As the United States grappled with the deadliest drug epidemic in its modern history, Walmart's relentless drive for efficiency and profit found itself entangled in the opioid crisis. In December 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a historic lawsuit against Walmart, alleging that the company blatantly failed to comply with the Controlled Substances Act, and the government argued that Walmart corporate headquarters pressured its pharmacists to process high volumes of prescriptions as fast as possible to maximize profits, systematically ignoring glaring red flags from suspicious doctors and invalid prescriptions. A federal jury ultimately determined that Walmart, alongside other major pharmacy chains, had substantially contributed to the deadly epidemic that ravaged American communities. As a result, the companies were forced to pay billions in restitution and damages. In a massive reckoning, Walmart agreed in 2022 to pay $3.1 billion to settle the sweeping opioid lawsuits across the nation. Furthermore, in December 2024, a Delaware Court of Chancery approved a monumental $123 million settlement regarding the historic failure of Walmart's board to implement legally mandated controls over its pharmacies. These legal battles represent some of the most significant and costly actions ever taken by the federal government against a corporation for fueling a public health catastrophe. From the ashes of the Tazreen factory in Bangladesh to the corrupted government offices of Mexico, and down to the devastated opioid-stricken communities in Middle America, the hidden costs of Walmart's empire reveal a chilling narrative. The everyday low prices, championed by Sam Walton, had metamorphosed into a global machine that commodified human life, corrupted foreign governments, and fueled domestic crises. The sheer scale of Walmart meant that its ethical failures didn't just affect a single town. They sent destructive shockwaves across the entire globe. As the death toll, the lawsuits, and the legal fines mounted into the billions, the world was finally forced to ask the ultimate question: what is the true price of cheap? As the legal fines and ethical scandals of the early 2000s threatened to dismantle Walmart's public image, the company realized that surviving the 21st century would require a radical rebranding, a shift from the ruthless exploiter to the global protector of the planet. In October 2005, facing mounting public pressure and a battered corporate reputation, Walmart's then CEO Lee Scott stood before his company and asked a provocative question. What if we used our size and resources to make this country and this earth an even better place for all of us? With that speech, Scott launched what appeared to be the most ambitious corporate environmental initiative in the history of retail. He outlined 3 monumental aspirational goals: to produce zero waste, to be fueled by 100% renewable energy, and to sell products that sustained both people and the environment. Fast forward to the present day, and the retail giant's public relations machinery paints a picture of a triumphant ecological revolution. Walmart now publicly brands itself as a regenerative company, dedicated to placing nature and humanity at the center of its business practices. And on the surface, the numbers they broadcast are undeniably staggering. By 2024, the company proudly announced that through its flagship environmental initiative, Project Gigaton, its suppliers had successfully avoided, reduced, or sequestered 1.19 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, hitting their massive 1 billion ton goal a full 6 years ahead of schedule. The company reports that 48.5% of its global electricity needs are now supplied by renewable sources of energy. These figures suggest a corporate titan in harmony with the planet, but a deeper look into the accounting reveal a much darker shade of green. Furthermore, Walmart claims to have diverted 83.5% of its global operational waste away from landfills and incineration. To the casual observer, the Goliath of retail has successfully transformed into the ultimate green champion. But in the world of corporate sustainability, headlines and press releases rarely tell the whole story. When you peel back the meticulously crafted layers of Walmart's environmental, social, and governance, or ESG reports, a far more complex, contradictory, and deeply paradoxical picture emerges. The first crack in the green facade appears when we examine how Walmart measures and communicates the sustainability of the products on its shelves. In its quest to fulfill Lee Scott's vision, Walmart partnered with the Sustainability Consortium to develop a measurement system known as the Sustainability Index. The goal was to shift from telling qualitative stories to using quantitative scorecards, asking suppliers to answer detailed questions about their greenhouse gas emissions, water use, and waste generation. By 2015, Walmart launched the Sustainability Leaders Shop on its website, placing a special badge on products made by suppliers who scored highly in this index. However, this initiative quickly ignited a firestorm of criticism. Environmental advocates and industry watchdogs argued that the program was deeply flawed and lacked fundamental transparency. Because the index reported on aggregate company results rather than disaggregated, specific product scores, and a company could earn a sustainability leader badge simply for being slightly better than its peers in a poorly performing category. Critic Stacy Mitchell famously stated that the program was straight out of Walmart's 10-year-old greenwashing playbook, pointing out the absurdity of the website placing a green sustainable label on a giant 150-pound roll of plastic bubble wrap. Critics argued that slapping a green badge on inherently wasteful products wasn't sustainability. It was highly sophisticated marketing designed to make consumers feel guilt-free about their continued consumption. But the contradictions go much deeper than online product badges. Let's look closely at the raw data surrounding Walmart's climate impact. The company frequently touts a massive drop in its emissions intensity, and a metric which measures the ratio of greenhouse gases emitted per $1 million of revenue. Indeed, Walmart has reduced its emissions intensity by 47.4% over the past decade. But emissions intensity is a convenient metric for a rapidly growing corporation. The atmosphere doesn't care about emissions per dollar of revenue. It cares about the absolute volume of carbon pumped into the air. And here is the reality. In 2024, Walmart's absolute Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, the greenhouse gases generated directly by its operations and purchased electricity, did not go down. They actually increased by 1.1%, bringing the total to nearly 16 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. This jump was driven largely by a 7% increase in transportation-related emissions, as the company brought more fleet operations in-house to support the massive growth of its e-commerce business. Buried deep within the text of its recent ESG updates, Walmart quietly made a stunning admission. The world's largest retailer anticipates that it will likely miss its interim goals to reduce absolute operational emissions by 35% by 2025 and 65% by 2030. The company cites limits in current technology, such as the lack of cost-effective electric heavy-duty tractors and delays in renewable energy infrastructure as the culprits. Similarly, while the company set a goal to use 20% post-consumer recycled content in its private brand plastic packaging, by 2025, the actual number reached in 2024 was a mere 8%. This gap between ambition and reality isn't just a failure of management, yet it is a fundamental collision between the laws of ecology and the laws of the everyday low price. This brings us to the ultimate, inescapable paradox of Walmart's green ambitions, the fundamental conflict between environmental sustainability and the everyday low prices business model. Walmart's empire was built and continues to thrive on a foundation of hyper-efficiency, relentless cost-cutting, and massive volume. The everyday low-cost mandate requires suppliers to continuously reduce their prices, often by 5% annually, regardless of their own underlying cost structures. Suppliers must find ways to cut costs, whether through cheaper materials, offshore production, or labor reductions, or risk losing Walmart as a customer. Can a corporation realistically demand that its tens of thousands of suppliers implement cutting-edge, expensive environmental safeguards while simultaneously squeezing their profit margins to the absolute bone? Furthermore, the environmental footprint of the Walmart model extends far beyond the supply chain. It is permanently etched into the physical landscape of America. The classic Walmart supercenter strategy fueled decades of suburban sprawl. A single supercenter generates an estimated 7,000 to 10,000 car trips every single day, creating massive new emissions of greenhouse gases and localized air pollution. The sprawling asphalt parking lots and massive footprint of these stores contribute to habitat fragmentation and increased runoff. But perhaps the most profound environmental impact comes from the very nature of the merchandise Walmart sells. As Heather Rogers, author of Gone Tomorrow, The Hidden Life of Garbage, pointed out, the real environmental impact comes from what Walmart sells: cheap commodities that are designed to wear out quickly. The company's relentless pursuit of cheap labor around the globe has exponentially increased the amount of fossil fuels required to ship a product across oceans just to reach a Walmart shelf. When a corporation's very existence and its $681 billion in annual revenue depends on driving relentless global consumption, expanding a sprawling logistical empire and pushing manufacturers to produce at the lowest possible cost. Environmental degradation isn't an accident, it is a structural byproduct of the system. So, is Walmart engaging in blatant greenwashing, or is it making genuine strides toward true sustainability? The answer is uncomfortably suspended somewhere in the middle, and it is undeniably true that Walmart has leveraged its colossal scale to force energy-efficient light bulbs into millions of homes, optimize trucking routes to save millions of gallons of diesel, and pressure suppliers to reduce packaging waste. When a company of Walmart's size tweaks its supply chain even slightly, the positive ripple effects are massive. However, until the core economic engine of the retail industry shifts away from the mass production and disposal of cheap, short-lived commodities, these sustainability initiatives will remain a paradox. Walmart's green scorecards, solar panels, and gigaton pledges are impressive feats of corporate management, but they may ultimately be high-tech band-aids applied to the gaping ecological wound caused by modern hyperconsumption. And as Walmart continues to navigate this delicate balance between profit and the planet, an entirely new disruptive force has entered the arena. A force that doesn't just challenge Walmart's sustainability metrics, but threatens its undisputed dominance over the entire retail world. While Walmart was busy painting its massive physical empire green, a silent predator was growing in the digital shadows, one that didn't care about parking lots, store footprints, or physical aisles. For 3 decades, spanning from the early 1960s to the early 1990s, Walmart stood as the single most disruptive force in American retail. It systematically disrupted local independent retailers, then regional chains, and finally, national discount chains like Kmart and Sears. Its influence extended far beyond sales floors. It dramatically disrupted manufacturing supply chains, forcing efficiencies and cost reductions. It fundamentally disrupted labor markets, pushing down wages and benefits. It even disrupted the economics of entire communities, often displacing smaller businesses and shifting economic power. The trajectory of this disruption was always singular, flowing inexorably toward Walmart, consolidating its power and market share. And then something began to happen. Something Walmart's leadership, for all their strategic acumen, failed to perceive with anywhere near the clarity they should have. In 1994, a relatively unknown entrepreneur named Jeff Bezos incorporated Amazon in his unassuming garage in Bellevue, Washington. The initial business model was refreshingly simple: online book sales. It was a niche, to be sure, but a clever one. Books, with their standardized nature and easy shipping, were the perfect product to test the nascent concept of online retail. Still, it remained a niche. Walmart's entrenched leadership, if they even bothered to think about Amazon at all in the mid-1990s, likely dismissed it with the same casual arrogance that Kmart had once displayed towards Walmart in the mid-1970s. They probably viewed Amazon as nothing more than a small regional player in a market we don't really compete in. This, as history would dramatically prove, it was not just a miscalculation. It was the most expensive misreading of a competitive threat in modern business history, mirroring the fatal error Kmart made in failing to take Walmart seriously. Jeff Bezos wasn't just building a website. He was building a digital mirror of the very machine Sam Walton had perfected decades earlier. Amazon's strategic logic, ironically, was an almost perfect reflection of Sam Walton's own philosophy, brilliantly rebuilt and adapted for the nascent internet age. Bezos started, much like Walton, with a product category that worked exceptionally well for the chosen format. Books for Amazon, just as geographically isolated rural small towns had worked so effectively for Walmart's first physical stores. Bezos, like Walton, obsessed over the customer experience and relentlessly focused on price competitiveness. And Amazon, like Walmart before it, systematically built a vast and complex logistics infrastructure that competitors could not easily replicate, establishing an insurmountable competitive moat. And then, using the resulting scale, Amazon began to expand aggressively into adjacent categories. By 2002, Amazon had moved far beyond just books, venturing into electronics, toys, tools, and household goods. In essence, the very core categories that defined a typical Walmart store. By 2005, Amazon Prime had launched, offering its revolutionary free 2-day shipping on millions of items. This represented a logistics value proposition that directly and powerfully competed with Walmart's long-standing in-store convenience advantage. The price comparison, particularly in specific categories, began to prove devastating for Walmart, and a discerning customer comparing prices on electronics or household goods online frequently discovered that Amazon was not only competitive but often significantly cheaper than Walmart, all without requiring a 30-minute drive to a physical store and the inevitable hassle of parking lot navigation and checkout lines. Walmart's initial response to this burgeoning threat was not only late but, for most of the 2000s, profoundly inadequate. The company did launch a website in the late 1990s, but it struggled. It spun it off as a separate entity, then awkwardly brought it back in-house, and subsequently spent an entire decade struggling to organically build an e-commerce operation that could effectively compete with a company that had been born as an e-commerce operation. The fundamental problem was deeply cultural. Walmart's entire operational genius, its very DNA, was intrinsically physical. The sprawling distribution centers, the strategically located store footprints, the masterful supply chain management, and the minute-by-minute floor-level associate operations. The company's essence resided in the bustling parking lot, the carefully stocked shelving, and the efficient checkout lane. E-commerce, by contrast, demanded fundamentally different infrastructure, different digital systems, distinct organizational capabilities, and, crucially, a willingness to actively cannibalize the highly profitable physical store business in ways that Walmart's deeply ingrained leadership found genuinely difficult, if not impossible, to stomach. In 2016, a critical turning point arrived as Walmart made its most significant and aggressive e-commerce move to date, and it acquired Jet.com, a promising startup e-commerce competitor, for an eye-watering $3.3 billion. As part of this monumental deal, Jet's visionary founder, Mark Lohr, was brought in to spearhead and run the combined Walmart e-commerce operation. The acquisition was a tacit but clear acknowledgement that Walmart, despite its immense resources, could not effectively build the necessary digital infrastructure and expertise from scratch. It had to buy it. Lohr's tenure produced tangible and real improvements in Walmart's long-struggling e-commerce capabilities. The company rapidly built out its fulfillment infrastructure, dramatically expanded its online selection, and innovatively launched curbside pickup, and a format that brilliantly combined the efficiency and convenience of e-commerce logistics with the unparalleled physical store infrastructure Walmart already possessed. By 2023, Walmart's e-commerce business was generating over $50 billion in annual global sales. While undeniably significant in its own right, this figure still represented only a fraction of Amazon's colossal e-commerce revenue. The more profound and strategically important development was that Walmart, for the first time in its storied history, now faced a truly serious competitor that was applying Walmart's own foundational strategic logic directly against it. Amazon was starting from the customer and meticulously working backward to price, precisely as Sam Walton had pioneered, and Amazon was diligently building logistics infrastructure that created structural cost advantages and competitive barriers, just as Walton had done with his distribution network. Amazon was strategically expanding from a nascent base in a market others didn't yet care about, internet retail in the 1990s, into the core retail market, just as Walton had expanded from rural Arkansas into the national discount retail market. Walton had done to Main Street what Amazon was now threatening to do, with terrifying efficiency, to Walmart. Whether Walmart can ultimately survive as a dominant retail force through the ongoing and intensifying Amazon era is a question that remains genuinely uncertain. The company certainly possesses formidable structural advantages. Its unparalleled physical store network, its massive and profitable grocery operations, and its Sam's Club warehouse business represent segments that Amazon has not yet fully replicated or conquered. Furthermore, Walmart has also demonstrated, particularly in the last decade, a newfound ability to adapt and innovate that it conspicuously failed to show during the Kmart and Sears collapse era. However, it is, for the first time in its entire history, in the unenviable position of a defender rather than an attacker. It is the established incumbent, the Goliath, being disrupted by a leaner, more agile competitor, a David, wielding a lower cost structure and offering a superior customer experience in key, rapidly growing categories. It is, in other words, precisely in the same vulnerable position that Kmart found itself in 1975 when it looked at the upstart Walmart and famously decided not to worry. And the outcome this time remains to be seen. But Walmart's survival instinct proved stronger than its predecessors. It realized that to defeat the god of algorithms, it had to become one. But unlike Kmart in the 1970s, Walmart refuses to quietly fade into obsolescence. To combat Amazon's prime delivery dominance, Walmart had to completely reimagine the map of America. They abandoned the traditional, rigid zip code system and turned to a brilliant feat of data science and geometry. Hexagonal geospatial grids. By dividing the country into interlocking hexagons, much like a honeycomb, Walmart ensured there were absolutely no gaps or overlapping inefficiencies at the edges of their delivery zones. Each hexagonal tile acts like a digital pixel, processing real-time data on drive times, store capacity, and customer demand. And this shift wasn't just theoretical. It instantly expanded their same-day delivery reach to 12 million additional households across the U.S. Furthermore, if one local store is out of stock, this grid system automatically routes items from multiple nearby stores to complete a single, seamless delivery. But Walmart didn't stop at the ground level. Taking to the skies, they aggressively expanded their drone delivery network in partnership with Google's Wing. With 75% coverage in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and an expansion to 270 locations nationwide, Walmart is now routinely completing deliveries in under 20 to 30 minutes. The battleground has officially moved from the retail floor to the airspace above your neighborhood. But Walmart's counteroffensive against Amazon extends far beyond physical logistics and drones, and it has now entered the digital mind of the consumer through a revolutionary concept, agentic commerce. Moving past the phase of mere tinkering, Walmart has fully embraced AI as a tool for massive business transformation. At the center of this digital arsenal is Sparky, Walmart's proprietary AI superagent. Sparky goes far beyond a traditional search bar, acting as a highly intuitive concierge that turns natural language directly into shoppable flows. A customer can simply ask, "What do I use to get this wine stain out of my carpet?" And Sparky instantly analyzes the query to recommend the exact cleaning supplies for immediate delivery. It can seamlessly predict when a household needs to replenish specific groceries, remind shoppers of their auto care appointments, and coordinate prescription pickups. And by embedding Sparky not only in its own app, but also integrating it with external platforms like ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, Walmart is capturing demand wherever it occurs. The financial impact is undeniable. Data reveals that customers who use the Sparky Assistant generate an average order value that is 35% higher than those who don't. As CEO Doug McMillon recently stated, the rise of agentic AI is a rare window to completely rewire how the company works, serves, and grows.